Welcome. Welcome to our webinar on technologies of the energy transition, low and zero carbon hydrogen. I'm Marivan Andrisa. I'm a senior researcher at the EsadeGeo Center for Geopolitics and Global Economy. And this is our second webinar in the series today, the series called Technologies of the Energy Transition, which we are organizing together with the Repsol Foundation. As we know, the fight against climate change will require a mixture of well-designed policies, behavioral change, and innovative technologies. And so this webinar series delves into that latter aspect. We are looking at some of the lesser-known technologies related to the energy transition, focusing particularly on those that may contribute to decarbonizing some of the most challenging sectors. 2 weeks ago, we had our first webinar on carbon capture, use, and storage, focusing on direct air capture. And in 2 weeks from now, we'll be discussing power to liquids. But today, we're focusing on hydrogen, and particularly its low and zero carbon variants. Hydrogen is a versatile energy carrier, and some have described it as the missing link in the energy transition. Yet at the same time, it has experienced various false starts in the past. Today, traction is building regarding the technology. It has a wide range of applications across transport, power, buildings and industry, and that it is at the top of the EU's energy agenda at present. So today, with our excellent panel, we will be discussing questions of whether hydrogen will take off and in what shape. So here with us today are Elena Verdú. She is a senior scientist at Repsol's Technology Lab, working on energy transition projects and green hydrogen production and applications in particular. We also have with us Dr. Dolf Gielen. He is the director of the International Renewable Energy Agency's Innovation and Technology Center. He oversees IRENA's work in advising member countries on energy transitions, scenarios, and planning. And lastly, we have Ilaria Conti. She is the head of gas at the Florence School of Regulation. She founded the gas area of FSR in 2017 and currently coordinates it while also leading the school's work on sector coupling in cooperation with DG Energy. Now, before we begin, we are pleased, of course, to have our audience with us today, and we are looking forward to receiving your questions via the chat. We'll certainly be taking those at the end of the webinar. And now, without further ado, I will give the floor to Elena Verdú, who will provide us with a flash introduction to hydrogen production and applications. The floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to introduce this webinar by giving you a brief overview of the different types of hydrogen production processes and its applications. The concept of hydrogen as an energy carrier is not new. In the past, it has also raised interest, but mainly focused on mobility applications. The difference today is the strong interest in decarbonization and the wide range of applications about hydrogen that are being studied. From decarbonization of the different industrial sectors and transport to the decarbonization of the natural gas grid and storage of renewable energy. Today, the hydrogen is mainly consumed in industry as a feedstock. From example, in various refining processes and also in the production of ammonia or methanol. In this industry, hydrogen is generated from the reaction of hydrocarbons with steam at high temperature, generating around 10 tons of CO2 per ton of hydrogen produced. The challenge today is to produce hydrogen from processes with a smaller carbon footprint that can be in all the aforementioned applications without losing competitiveness. So let's review the different types of hydrogen production possibilities. Colors are often used to differentiate the types of hydrogen depending on the production processes. So we have gray hydrogen, that is the one that is obtained from the conventional process mentioned before. Blue hydrogen, that it's obtained from a conventional production process, but incorporating a CO2 capture system in order to reduce the CO2 emissions. A reduction of up to 90% of CO2 emission can be achieved depending on the carbon capture technology applied. There are currently fully developed and commercial carbon capture technologies available, but the ones that allow a greater CO2 solution are still in demonstration phase, waiting to be scaled up. And finally, when we speak about green hydrogen, we are referring to hydrogen obtained from renewable energy sources with virtually zero CO2 emissions. The plants that are currently in operation are mainly pilot or demonstration projects on a small to medium scale. In terms of cost expressed in euros per ton of hydrogen produced, currently, green hydrogen is the most expensive one and gray hydrogen is the cheapest. In this slide, we have classified the main technologies for production low and zero carbon hydrogen depending on the raw material used to obtain it. In terms of development maturity expressed by the technology readiness level index, the ones that are in the more advanced state of maturity are water electrolysis, which is the splitting of water into hydrogen and oxygen through the application of a current obtained from renewable energy sources, obtaining hydrogen from biomass, and finally, production of hydrogen from hydrocarbons with the conventional process called steam methane reforming, but applying a CO2 capture. Of all these production pathways, natural gas steam reforming with CO2 capture is the first one that will become competitive in the next years, provided a viable solution is found for storing or using the CO2 capture. Next in line comes biomass gasification, subject to the availability of biomass stock for large-scale hydrogen production. Having said that, it's actually water electrolysis using renewable power, which has the greatest potential for cost reductions and is expected to become the most competitive process in the medium to long term. We visualize blue hydrogen as a transition process and enabler for the future production of green hydrogen by starting to creating now a hydrogen economy on a more competitive process. We will see the transition to green hydrogen once its costs are further reduced. And in the last slide for this introduction, we have summarized different possibilities for the hydrogen value chain. In terms of hydrogen production, we can choose between a centralized production scheme, for which we will need a distribution infrastructure, or a distributed production scheme where hydrogen is produced locally at the points of consumption. As for the application offered by low and zero carbon hydrogen, we can highlight in industry as a feedstock, that is the one that we already know, but also for generating in industry heating and power, in power generation as an energy storage medium, in building as a heating medium, and in transport, where we can find two possibilities. One is its direct use in fuel cell vehicles, or its use as a raw material along with CO2 for the manufacture of so-called synthetic fuels or e-fuels. This last application offers advantages because it can benefit from the existing logistical infrastructure and can be used in the existing internal combustion engines. To conclude, hydrogen should be part of the solution of the decarbonization strategy. Low carbon hydrogen and zero carbon hydrogen production technologies are reaching maturity and have started to be used in and deployed in different sectors all around the world. But in order to reach full development and wide-scale use of these technologies, providing good returns in the long term, we need a strong support from public institutions and close collaboration between all the sectors involved in all the value chain.
Now be switching over to Dr. Dolf Gielen after this excellent introduction. I think we've hit the ground running. Dr. Gielen, we'd like if you could explain to us much of your work on this issue related to the outlooks for green and blue hydrogen, their cost competitiveness and how that might evolve in the future, and also obstacles and opportunities related to hydrogen. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to present you some findings here. I'm waiting for my slides to show up in the list, so I'll start talking and then we'll see how it goes. First of all, we are receiving a lot of questions from our member countries about the issue of hydrogen and especially the role of green hydrogen. That's especially that's in relation to renewables in our context. I'm still waiting for my slides to show up in the list. So, not really. Hey, no. So they're trying to solve that. We look at green hydrogen from the viewpoint of sector coupling. As an opportunity to introduce more renewables also in the end-use sectors. Use renewable power to produce green hydrogen and with that then decarbonize buildings, industry or transport. We also look at it as an opportunity to use surpluses of renewable power, and it can be a flexibility option to facilitate the introduction of higher shares of variable renewables. And the third aspect is to tap into remote renewable energy resources. So there's also quite some interest into hydrogen trade. And there's a number of bilateral discussions going on. So only a few days ago, Germany and Morocco signed an MOU on exploring hydrogen and hydrogen commodity trade. Today, about 1% of all hydrogen that is produced is from renewable power. I think now you can see the slides. But that 1% is not dedicated production. So it's hydrogen produced as a byproduct of the production of chlorine. And About 4% of all hydrogen is produced that way, and about a quarter of all power is produced with renewables. So that's how you end up with about 1% green hydrogen today. So there's a significant growth potential. Dedicated electrolyzers for hydrogen are coming up. There is a project in Fukushima, alkaline 10 megawatt machine that recently went on stream. And there is a 10 megawatt machine here, close from the place where I am in Wesseling, in the Shell refinery, that is scheduled to come on stream this fall. And there is a lot of discussion now about projects in the hundreds of megawatt scale or even gigawatts scale. But of course, that will take a couple of years before they come on stream. Now, what we've done is we've done a number of studies around the issue of green hydrogen production and outlook. The last one was for the second Hydrogen Energy Ministerial in September last year. We're currently completing one around the role of green hydrogen for decarbonizing industry and transport. And we're working on an in-depth electrolyzer study looking at flexibility potentials. We had a ministerial roundtable at our 10th assembly in January. There were a number of interesting conclusions from that, and one of them was to start a collaborative framework on green hydrogen. In fact, earlier today we had the first meeting of that collaborative framework, so that is also ongoing. In terms of hydrogen demand, it continues to grow rapidly. We're about 120 million tons per year global demand. And the vast majority, about 2/3, is for refining and for ammonia production. So there is significant growth potential in other areas. There have been many studies about hydrogen in recent years. A number of them are listed here. It's more moving now into the policy area. So there was a German hydrogen strategy announced a few days ago, and the European hydrogen strategy will follow in early July. And also in the framework, in the context of the stimulus packages, there is a lot of discussion about hydrogen and hydrogen investments at the moment. Now, Elena just discussed already the various applications, the versatility of hydrogen on the supply side, but also on the demand side. So there are in virtually all sectors, hydrogen can be deployed. So we see a potential to grow hydrogen significantly, especially in the context of a global need to decarbonize energy supply and demand. So we issued our latest global renewables outlook in April. And in that outlook, we have a scenario which we call transforming energy systems, TESS. And so that's a 2-degree compatible scenario. And in that scenario, the use of hydrogen doubles. And compared to today's level, and the supply mix changes fundamentally. So 2/3 is green hydrogen produced from renewable power. 1/3 is blue hydrogen produced from fossil fuels with CCS. So the whole hydrogen supply would decarbonize, which is in itself already a significant mitigation opportunity. Now, this is a 2-degree scenario. In a 1.5-degree scenario, hydrogen demand would grow even further. It would roughly quadruple from today's level. Now, if you look at what that now means, what is the role of hydrogen in total CO2 emission mitigation? Its contribution is here indicated for green hydrogen in green, for blue hydrogen in blue. We see that green hydrogen, if you look at the total emissions reduction, if you would go for a net zero by 2050, 2060, it could contribute about 8% of the total emissions reduction with green, and then another 1-2% with blue. So let's say up to 10% of the total effort is hydrogen based. So that is a significant contribution. And another way to look at that is how much. So hydrogen is a form of, at least green hydrogen is a form of indirect electrification. So you use electricity to produce hydrogen to replace fossil fuels. Electrification overall in our scenarios grows very significantly, from around 20% today to around 50% of final energy demand, and out of that total contribution, about 16-17% is electricity used to produce green hydrogen. So hydrogen becomes also a significant component of the overall electricity market, green hydrogen production. That would require around 4,000 gigawatts of renewable generation capacity and about 1,700 gigawatts of electrolysis capacity. So in comparison, today's global electrolysis capacity is in the order of 200 or 300 megawatts. So it's a huge growth from today's level. But of course, this will only happen if we get to economic price levels. Today, as was said, green hydrogen is still significantly more expensive than gray or even blue hydrogen, but we think that there is significant cost reduction potential. There are two key components to that. One is cheap renewable power. The second one is cheap electrolyzers. So these are the two key development aspects. And in renewable power, we've seen rapid progress over recent years. We expect that to continue. And as I said, for electrolyzers, we're currently having another close look at what level of cost we can expect in the coming years for electrolyzers. Now, apart from direct use of hydrogen for various heating applications, you can also use it to make green commodities. So one of them is production of iron, direct reduced iron. So that is something with at the moment quite a lot of projects ongoing in Europe. We think an additional dimension could be to introduce the trade of green iron, green DRI, as a way to tap into remote renewables potential. So instead of transporting hydrogen to Europe and converting iron ore here into iron, why not use the renewable power on site where the mining takes place, and then ship the green hydrogen, the DRI, to Europe. So, and we think that the costs can be quite attractive. Now, another aspect I wanted to highlight was mentioned power to X. So you can produce liquids, but there's also a lot of discussion, a lot of attention at the moment, for example, for ammonia as a fuel in shipping. And ammonia can be produced using green hydrogen. So it's not yet certain that it goes in this direction, but it's one of the few options that is seriously being considered at this moment. But again, key aspect is to bring the cost of green hydrogen down to economic levels. At the moment, as a fuel, it will be 4 times as expensive. We expect by 2030 we can get to a level which is double that of today's fossil fuels that are used. Now, finally, one more, the transport sector. There is in East Asia still a lot of attention for hydrogen cars. We think that there is inherently a bit of a disadvantage in terms of the overall fuel economy, and that is illustrated here. So electric vehicles have overall a better economy, fuel economy or energy economy. But of course, there are specific applications such as long-haul freight transportation and maybe also very cold climates where hydrogen may have a future also in cars. And final field of applications, hydrogen mixed into gas, natural gas, to green the gas systems. That's receiving a lot of attention. It's at the moment limited by the standards for gas and gas systems, and also, of course, the economics are still challenging because the hydrogen, at least the green hydrogen, is significantly more expensive than natural gas. But also a lot of pilot projects going on in this area, and the volumes could be quite significant. So, in conclusion, there is an interesting opportunity for green hydrogen. It should be considered as part of the investments in stimulus packages. It's important to ensure that future hydrogen supply is green, and we think that especially it is clean, and we think it's especially that there is an opportunity for green hydrogen. And then also this trade aspect needs to be further developed. That concludes my remarks. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gielen. We have covered a lot of ground. Thank you also for powering through some technical difficulties. I think there's a lot of material to talk about, but before we get into that, before we get into Q&A, we'd like to make a stopover in Europe and the EU particularly with Ms. Ilaria Conti. She is intensely familiar with the policy landscape related to gas in the EU, and so I'm sure she'll be able to provide us with a comprehensive overview of policy developments related to hydrogen in the EU at present. The floor is yours.
Many thanks, Marie. I'm sharing my screen and I hope it's visible for everybody. So yes, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. And after two, I would say, very clear introductions on the technical sides of hydrogen, we will now focus more on the policy side. And the title I got from you, the policy landscape, is really, I would say, perfect, the most appropriate one, because at the moment we can only talk about landscape for policy. It's definitely too early to talk about a proper framework, policy framework or regulatory framework for hydrogen. So why? Because hydrogen has been so far treated, at least in Europe, as a sort of market source. So something left really to market development, something where policy and regulation should not enter too much. But for various reasons, and some of them we will see later on, hydrogen is now getting a lot of attention, particularly in Europe. And we expect it to be the objective of some policy initiatives soon. And so there are many questions to be answered in the next few weeks or months. Let's start going through them. First of all, why is hydrogen now a European policy topic? I would say European energy and climate policy. We've seen it's been in the news. It's really at the top of the European policy agenda. mainly because it is involved in the discussion on what would be the role of gas in the future energy sector in Europe. Of course, this debate originates from the need to meet the so-called decarbonization targets that we are all aware of. And the role of natural gas and of the so-called new gases, of which hydrogen is definitely one, is really going to be important, because the main acknowledgement now is that electrification cannot be the only solution to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So there will be a need for clean molecules of gas, and hydrogen concurs to that seat. Secondly, hydrogen is very much involved in the debate on the European Green Deal, as industry is called to a clean and circular economy, and therefore hydrogen is thought to be a useful instrument to achieve that. Thirdly, last but not least, hydrogen is a good candidate to become the energy carrier, or one of the main energy carriers, to achieve what the European Commission strategy calls sector coupling and smart sector integration. And sector coupling is basically the vision for more and more integrated electricity and gas sectors going forward. And smart sector integration is the new target, which involves electricity and gas being the base load for attracting and interlinking more sectors, such as heating, transport, telecommunications, etc., and agriculture. So we can say that there's a general consensus that hydrogen will definitely advance in the EU agenda, and pretty soon. But if we take a snapshot, if we take a picture of the regulatory and policy supports for hydrogen at the moment, we will see that there is no overarching structural policy for hydrogen development, and there are no statutory and regulatory provisions. So what we have, in fact, is just some EU and national schemes supporting some specific areas. It's the case of transport. We know all of us are certainly aware of different examples in European member states. Italy, just to name one, has some support for hydrogen in transport. But actually, these are really mainly no excise duties, like for electric vehicles, or they support the development of basic infrastructure for example, hydrogen refueling points. Additionally, there are innovation subsidies for hydrogen, and as also Dolf Gielen just mentioned, at national level there have been already, and we are in the course of seeing many national initiatives supporting hydrogen at national level, such as Germany. In European terms, the support went to some demonstration projects, so mainly in research. The fuel cell and hydrogen joint undertaking is an example, was under the research program Horizon 2020. There are some programs that support the development of hydrogen infrastructure, among other types of infrastructures, and also Interreg programs that are some specific instrument to facilitate the cooperation across regions in Europe in energy, and not only. But hydrogen is definitely, and we cannot deny this, we heard it earlier today, it is definitely a multi-purpose resource. So for his versatility, it is a very important commodity, a very important instrument for achieving carbon neutrality. It is abundant in nature, and it is relatively easy to produce and store. It can be transformed, and we heard also from Dolf just earlier on, in a number of other substances, of other usages. It can be transported and used in various sectors. And very importantly, it can use the existing infrastructure, of course, with some limitations, because it can be blended. And it allows the utilization of the abundant renewable electricity production that we have at the moment, for example, via power to gas, and so that the electricity, which renewable electricity, which would be normally curtailed, at least part of it could be used for electrolyzers and therefore for the production of green hydrogen. Also, hydrogen is sustainable. It can be produced depending on the generation process as a low or zero carbon gas, and it is not of fossil origin. Also, the fact that it can be produced locally in Europe helps the resilience from imports. So no need in the future, in the long-term future, to then import fossil fuels from outside of Europe. So in fact, hydrogen is a really good candidate to support the big vision of the European Commission for a smart sector integration. And here you have a picture of what this vision would enable, would envisage. Sector coupling as a basis, as I said, electricity and gas together, interlinked, and interlinking at a second stage other sectors, transport, heating and cooling, industry feedstock, really for the versatility and all the features that we just highlighted. But of course, we have already acknowledged that hydrogen brings also some challenges at technical or economic level. Dolf already went through them quite thoroughly, so I'm not going to repeat I'm not going to focus on these challenges. And I'm going more to discuss about the policy and regulatory challenges. And there are quite a few. The Florence School of Regulation has been researching and debating and publishing on basically most, if not all of them. Starting from market design, should hydrogen be treated as a separate market, or is it just a gas quality issue? We had a workshop a few months ago on this here in Florence, and in fact there was a general agreement that hydrogen is somehow different from natural gas, and therefore some specific measures should be conceived for hydrogen in respect to natural gas. If that's the case, then should there be any targets, any let's say support to hydrogen in terms of targets to meet, or any types of incentives? And if we are talking about incentives, where should they fall, at the production level or at the consumption level? Can we think about a market for hydrogen, separate market for hydrogen in terms of tradability? So, for example, guarantees of origins are also now quite high in the discussion agenda in Europe. Can they serve as a sort of certification of the green value of hydrogen, at the same time being a tradable instrument? Infrastructure is certainly another key element on which regulation and policy will have to focus. Will we see regional networks of hydrogen, particularly where there are industrial districts which make use of this hydrogen, or do we have to think bigger and think of a really like a hydrogen backbone for the whole of Europe? In that case, there should be some safety rules to be applied, and we know that the issue of acceptance also of hydrogen from European citizens is something that cannot be neglected. And also, what do we do with the existing infrastructure, very importantly? Should we think of a repurposing of the existing network, mainly because we know that, for example, blending, which is the possibility of injecting hydrogen together with methane, so with natural gas, has different limits depending on the network, depending on the technical features of the network. So the blending limit in the Netherlands is not the same as in the UK, for example, or in Germany. And in terms of governance, if we are going to have a revisited vision for infrastructure, for gas infrastructure in Europe, who should run this infrastructure? This is also a very important topic, because we know that most of the investments in hydrogen at the moment come from TSOs, from the transmission system operators, and according to the current legislation in Europe, transmission and generation are two separate activities. This is the unbundling principle. So this creates, let's say, a big dilemma, which that some regulators are thinking to solve, or put at least into brackets for a moment, with the idea of a regulatory sandbox. So some regulation, some deviations from the current regulation, just for a limited period of time, and applying to some specific situations. But so, of course, there is no time to go in depth in all of these open questions. But I wanted just to focus your attention on one thing. We don't even have a definition for hydrogen in the current European legislation. We have the RED II, which is the directive for renewables, recast directive from 2018. And that defines renewable energy as energy from renewable sources. But as you can see here, there is among the sources that are considered here renewables, hydrogen is not there. On the other hand, hydrogen is mentioned, is one of the recitals of the same directive, but just as just in the context of the creation of guarantees of origin, and then hydrogen is mentioned as a other renewable gas. So there is still a lot to do on that side too. So it appears clear, and this is one of the many issues that we discussed in the Florence School of Regulation, that one first step could be achieving a clear taxonomy for not only for hydrogen, but for all these new so-called green gases. Taxonomy means the discipline of classification from Greek. So since there is a lot of debate around and different definitions of renewable gas, green gas, low carbon gas, zero carbon gas, there is a need to in fact to discipline even the language, so to make sure that we refer to the same things when using these terms. And of course, this would imply having a clear target and deciding which are the important parameters to define and to classify this gas, and also which methodology to use. At Florence School, we did it. I don't know how much time I have left, but I would like just to give you a quick snapshot. We try to classify biogas, biomethane, synthetic methane, and hydrogen, being an important one. And we decided that the most important parameters were definitely the green value of a gas, meaning the origin, fossil or non-fossil, and the emissions, the greenhouse gases emissions during the generation process for this gas. And also we thought that very important is how gas can be used. So whether this gas can already be used and traded, or if some transformations will be needed before that. To conclude, there are some important steps in the European Energy Regulatory Agenda, really close. On the 8th of July, we expect the publication of the European Commission's strategy for hydrogen and smart sector integration, or anyway before the summer. We also expect the launch of the Clean Hydrogen Alliance, which is a special project that probably will follow the example of other successful alliances in the past, such as the Battery Alliance, bringing together industry and regulators and research institutes. So we expect it in July. The Gas Regulatory Forum, which happens twice a year, the next one will be in Madrid, and we expect a lot of discussion about hydrogen and other low carbon gases. And finally, the big legislative package, which should address, among other things, hydrogen, is expected for the middle of next year. What we can expect, these are just some insights that I would like to share with you. Certainly, we will expect from the upcoming strategy a strong push to create demand. What is missing, in fact, is demand, as we've seen also in previous presentations for hydrogen. This will hopefully help lowering the production costs, which is really the big problem at the moment. Also, we will expect guidance on how to facilitate the penetration of hydrogen in hard to decarbonized sectors, and a clear positioning of Europe vis-à-vis other markets worldwide for hydrogen. And finally, we will expect a definition and prioritization of green versus blue hydrogen. And if there's any planned support to either of the two, this would probably be included in the strategy. Finally, very importantly, we expect a long-term vision for infrastructure that will transport hydrogen, particularly whether Europe sees a big backbone for hydrogen in Europe, or if prioritization will be given to repurposing the existing infrastructure or building new ones. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I think that was an excellent presentation covering really a lot of ground, and a lot is moving in the EU at this point. So we'll just launch into Q&A now. And of course, to our audience, please continue sending questions. We are most happy to pose them to our speakers. I'd like to start in the same order as we presented. So for Ms. Verdú, we have a number of questions coming in. From Simon Kirby, there's a question about the type of work that Repsol is focusing on regarding the production of blue and green hydrogen. And I'll also group in a second question, which is related, which is a question by Jose Corrales on Repsol's new renewable hydrogen facility in Bilbao. So I'd like to take those two questions at once.
Okay. I will begin for the last one. Yes, we have a new project designed to demonstrate synthetic fuels in Petronol in Bilbao, in the refinery that we have there. The hydrogen produced will be used mainly in the production of these synthetic fuels. It also planned to send it to the Petronol refineries in the case where the plant for production of e-fuels is not running. In this case, it is planned also to send this green hydrogen to the refinery in order to produce the conventional fuels. And also, in a medium-long term, this green hydrogen could be applied for cover a possible demand that could be in the surrounding area of Bilbao for the mobility sector, for example. And regarding the other one, the other question about green and blue hydrogen. Let me say that we at Repsol we are focused on both types of hydrogen. One case is the Petronol project, the Bilbao project that we have just announced. But we are also developing at Repsol Technology Lab a technology based on photoelectrocatalysis, that it's a technology that have less grade of maturity, but that also can we can obtain a green hydrogen with less energy consumption. And so we are focused on both types of hydrogen, blue and green. We visualize, as I have said in my introduction, blue hydrogen as an enabler of green hydrogen. And the problems we face are obviously that these processes are not yet competitive, but we know that they will be, and that's why we are working on on that technologies. And the need to build a regulation and standards around these all new hydrogen applications that are in front of us, and that we know that are part of the solution to reach our goal to the decarbonization.
Okay, thanks very much. And that links us actually quite well into the question that we have for Dr. Gielen. So you discussed the main factors that are affecting the price and the production of hydrogen by electrolysis. The question is, with the factors at play today, at the technology level, at the commercial level, at the policy level, when could we expect to see green hydrogen becoming cost competitive?
Well, we see a potential to get down to cost levels below $3 per kilo by 2030. Whether that is cost competitive or not, of course, depends a little bit in the market you're in. For example, what is the specific natural gas price? But it also depends on whether there is any CO2 price or not. I mean, to put the $3 per kilo, which is also a target in many government documents, to put that a bit into perspective, that's the equivalent of $25 per gigajoule, and a gigajoule natural gas at the moment for wholesale is $3 or $4 per gigajoule. So there is still quite even at that price level, quite a gap. And there will be a need to bring down the cost further, even below $2 per gigajoule. And we think that is possible, but at the moment, especially at remote locations. So in a European context, that will be challenging. And that's why this hydrogen trade and hydrogen commodity trade is receiving so much attention.
Wonderful, thank you for that. I think in a second round, we'll get a little bit into geography and where hydrogen is being produced. So we'll come back to that for sure. With Ms. Conti, I wanted to go into a little bit the attention that hydrogen is receiving right now. I mean, we saw this joint declaration by the Pentalateral Forum at the beginning of this week. We really see quite a lot of momentum in member states and at the Commission level for hydrogen. But hydrogen has been discussed many times in the past. And so my question is, what is different now?
It's a very good question. And actually, it has been the question so far because hydrogen is not a new topic even in the European energy policy debate. I have the pleasure of working together with Andris Piebalgs here. He's a part-time professor here at the Florence School of Regulation. Just to tell you an anecdote, we work very closely on many issues, and he's been commissioner for energy from 2004 till 2009. And he, when we started discussing or engaging our research these days on hydrogen, he was very skeptical because he told me, you know, I heard about hydrogen a lot. I've discussed so many times with many stakeholders during my time at the Commission as Energy Commissioner. And so what could be different now? They even convinced me to buy a hydrogen car back then. So I believe after some discussions, we thought and we agreed that probably the main driver now, what has changed is compared to those years, is of course the huge abundance of renewable electricity. So if on one hand, it's true that curtailments are not so impacting so much yet on the overall electricity generation. On the other hand, it is something that it is worth using, possibly reusing, and that's why, particularly with power to gas, with electrolysis, this is becoming an interesting perspective, having the possibility to store renewable electricity and therefore regenerate clean energy, clean molecules. Of course, as we are all debating, the big problem, the big obstacle here lies in the high costs of electrolyzers, of generation of this green hydrogen via electrolysis. But green hydrogen can also be produced in other ways.
Okay, thanks so much for that. So I'd like to go now into a second round, and the first question is for Dr. Gielen. So there's this question that's come in regarding China, where we're all familiar with their push towards electrical vehicles, battery-based, but they're asking whether China, for example, is working towards hydrogen in cars and other industries. And that ties into kind of a larger question. Where is green and blue hydrogen most at the top of the agenda at this point? Where is it being produced? Where is it more likely to be produced?
Yeah, first question about China. There is quite a lot of activity around hydrogen vehicles in China. So there's a number of manufacturers of hydrogen delivery vans. There's also some movement on hydrogen for heavy-duty trucks. We recently, together with NDRC, we did a study for the National Renewable Energy Demonstration Zone outside Beijing. It's called Zhangjiakou. And there they have a large number of hydrogen buses running. And that is also now being expanded to other areas. So quite a lot of attention, but so far that was hydrogen from coal. So the next step is indeed to make sure that it's clean hydrogen that is being deployed. That is not yet that much on the agenda. In terms of active countries, well, it's I think well known that Japan has been very active as a user and has been looking into supply options from abroad. And it's also Australia has discovered hydrogen as an important potential future export industry and is currently very active. I mentioned in my presentation also Morocco, so the recent agreement between Morocco and Germany to explore trade, and also in the Middle East, so Saudi Arabia, UAE, they are certainly looking at this. So both from the let's say that there is a demand pool and a supply push going on at the moment.
Okay, thanks very much. And with that, I think I'll go back to Ms. Conti for a moment. So again, in the international context, we see the EU showing a clear strategic interest at this point for hydrogen. What role do you see for the EU at the international level in hydrogen markets? How might it relate to its neighbors in this new hydrogen future? I know it's a bit of a future-looking question, but any thoughts are welcome.
Yes, and it is a very complex question because it takes into account many elements. But I think if I put myself in the feet of the people working at the Commission on the upcoming strategy, I think the main, let's say, principle leading the strategy, the international strategy, is let's try not to miss this train at least. The hydrogen train, I mean, because the Commission has certainly learned from the past, the recent past actually, when solar energy was becoming, let's say, economically viable. There was some sort of initial reluctance in investing in solar energy, even in just believing in the potential of solar energy. And because of this maybe hesitation, perhaps we lost somehow we did not become the leader. Europe did not become the leader in, for example, in the production of solar panels. We know who the leaders are in this field, and they are not in Europe. They are in Asia, China. So I think we don't want to repeat the same mistake. We want to be really at the forefront of hydrogen production and value chain as much as possible. So believing in this.
Okay, so Europe trying to remain ahead and taking leadership in this issue in a way. All right, wonderful. I am afraid that our time is up. And so I am left only with giving you a big show of gratitude to our wonderful speakers for joining us. It was really great to have you with us. I think we covered a lot of ground on this important topic. I'd like to thank also our audience for joining us, for their questions. And with that, I would like to simply wrap this up by inviting you to join us again in 2 weeks. That's on July 2nd at 4 o'clock for our final webinar in this series on power to liquids. Thanks so much and see you next time.
Thanks.